that created the difference in outcome. Now, the basic point is direction is more important than speed. If you're heading in the wrong direction, doesn't matter what speed you're going. Right? That's simple as that. And the travel slow reform is that after the honeymoon period, you could be captured by a Western group. But let's talk about China. Why did China move so slowly? Because you can see the difference between China today and China then. Reforms in China occur at a much faster pace after around 95 onwards than before. Why? Because progress is made funeral by funeral. The old men of the revolution die, and the young people get to do what should be done. Because the old men were sentimental, they had fought for a certain society, they believed in it. That's why when reforms were first undertaken, it was confined to the southernmost part of China. Shenzhen, Zhuhai, Xiamen. No, Zhuhai, Xiamen. Anyway, the southernmost part. The farthest away for the old man in Beijing don't have to see it. No. China reformed slowly for political reasons. There's nothing particularly optimal about it from an economic point of view. Because how can you justify reducing poverty slowly? Just because slow is good, and so you reduce poverty slowly? That is just incredibly foolish. Now let's look at principle number 4. What kind of instruments could you use? Here, it seems very straightforward when I say the lesson is adopt and adapt. Look around the world, see who's doing best in a particular problem, copy his way, take it back, and possibly make some changes for differences in conditions. The reason why I bring it up, even though it may seem obvious, is that there's this long idea among many people that we shouldn't borrow blindly from other countries. We want things that reflect our values. Right? In other words, the first way to show that that is wrong is to say, are the Japanese today less Japanese than they were in 1868 when the Meiji Restoration began? The Japanese certainly owe their success to adopt and adapt. And having become rich, they're able to afford the preservation of their cultures and the blossoming of their cultures even more. But more importantly, it comes down to this. Do you have to have the same cultural values in order to adopt the instruments from another civilization? For example, let's take the case of slavery. In 16th century Malaysia, if you borrow money and you cannot return it, what would happen to the borrower? Most likely, the borrower would make you his slave, take one's wife, and eat the dog. Right? Basically, he just, it's just how slavery, that's slavery, right? But then in many cultures, not unique, in many cultures, there's this idea of everyone deserves a second chance. Repent and you shall be saved. 回头是岸. Right? If you have this idea that people deserve a second chance, inevitably, in one of these cultures, the idea will percolate up, let's have something called bankruptcy. You were stupid to borrow money to do stupid things, but he was stupid enough to lend you money to do stupid things. So both were stupid, and since both are stupid, both should take responsibilities. That's what bankruptcy is. You deserve a second chance. That's what the moral basis is. Now, suppose I belong to a culture that don't believe in second chance. 活该的, you deserve what you get. Should I adopt the bankruptcy law in my country? The answer is yes. Do you know why? It's good for the economy. It is only because of the bankruptcy law that the actuarial science and risk assessment became developed by scholars. Because once you know that when you lend money and you cannot get it back because it was a stupid decision, you begin to do risk assessment. So that's good for economic development. The allocation of capital is more efficient, and that promotes growth. So here is a case where you don't have to believe in giving the guy a second chance, but you should still adopt that institution called bankruptcy law. So many of these policy instruments are very free in a sense. The worst way of thinking about it is like, hey, we've got to ban some groups from doing yoga because yoga has started off by another religion, ethnic group, right? We see that. But what I'm trying to say is, learn from the best. That's basically the simple lesson. Let's go to the fifth one. The fifth one, the last one is you should be very well aware. Many times the government is thrown out only because people are not happy with it. And why are people not happy with it? Because you're doing a bad job. And what is the most common sign of a bad job? They have lost control of the budget process. Just like the Greek government has been reporting a budget deficit that's 1/3 of what it was. The government can always hide the budget deficit. You could always have it borrowed by a state-owned company and hide the debt there, so that the explicit budget deficit is much smaller. So, if there is a change in government, I would say that the new government will be inheriting a mess. Has to. That's why the economy has been doing badly. And because you're inheriting a mess, you've got to be mentally ready for it. Not only mentally ready for it, but actually analytically ready for it. That's why it's very important, and this has been done, is that the aspiring government has to have a clear enough manifesto spelling out its program of what it wants to do. And I think the Pakatan Manifesto is a very good program with details of what it would do. That clear statement is important because the moment the new government takes power, it doesn't have to waste time arguing of should I do this or should I not do that. Why? Because the people have voted on the manifesto. The manifesto has political legitimacy. And because it's legitimacy, it could be implemented. So that's why this aspiring government has to be fully conscious of that. The reason you managed to get the job is because the previous person has broken the shop. And because the shop is broken, you better come in with a spanner to fix it. So in the old days, like as I said, the biggest challenge has always been the budget. How would one fix a budget deficit? In the old days, you quickly run to one side of the Cold War. It's just like when Sukarno was overthrown, Suharto came in. And why was Sukarno overthrown? Because Sukarno was running a budget deficit of like 12% of GDP, and he's been printing money to finance it. So CPI was 700%. So how was that fixed? Because when Suharto came in, to fix the budget deficit, you have to raise taxes and cut spending. That is certainly beginning on a very unpopular way. But Indonesia was lucky because the Americans mobilized its Cold War allies to set up IGGR, Intergovernmental Group on Indonesia. The sole purpose is to give money to Indonesia so that it will stabilize the economy so as to prevent the country with the largest communist membership outside of the Iron Curtain will not turn true communist. So that's why Suharto has been bailed out many times. Suharto has done bad things, and every time the Americans told the Japanese to spend its money to bail out Suharto. But in 1998, they let Suharto fail. They did not bail out Suharto. Why? The Cold War was over. Suharto was dispensable. No, but so in this age where there's no more Cold War, clearly how is the new government going to be able to finance the budget deficit? It has to clearly continue. The immediate step is to be able to continue to get financing from the private market. And in order to get private market, you've got to have a credible plan of action. What would be a credible plan of action? The best example is, how is the government, the new government, going to be able to close the budget deficit? Does it have to lay off the civil servants? Well, then they are not going to work for Musa Husam for sure. No, Husam. But anyway, the experience of Penang is revealing. For the last 10 years, before Guan Yin came in, Penang government's been running a small deficit, but then the federal government always bailed out Penang. And since Guan Yin came in, he has been running budget surpluses. And actual spending has gone up by 50%. Is it because Najib is giving Guan Yin more money than before, so that he could run a budget surplus and spend more? The reason was Guan Yin found that when he adopted the open tender system, everything cost only around 65% of what it used to cost. So straight away, his development budget went up by at least 25%. And then he found out, when he sold land, Kosu Kun sold the land for Straits Key claim, the land that was reclaimed, at $1 per square foot. And when Guan Yin looks at what he can do, he finds he gets over $700 a square foot. So all of a sudden, state land brings in more revenue than before. And then we found that many state assets had been rented out, but no rents had been collected for quite a long time. So all he did was start collecting the money. Now, if those proportions I talk about are true for the federal government, then we would certainly be able to wipe out what I see to be the deficit, and to undertake new social expenditure programs. So we don't need, so the idea of that, to take care of the budget, you have to slice the civil service and so forth, that need not be done, at least not in the short run. Because we do have a bloated civil service, but then these people are victims too. They were poorly trained, and so the government became the employer of last resort. You know, what you could do is, there are two costs of a bloated civil service. One cost is entirely financial. You have to pay their bills. The second cost is, they just became sources of corruption, red tape, bureaucratic maneuvering, right? So in fact, one way to do, possibly the second cost is higher than the first cost. Do what Suharto did to his customs service. He told them all, I will pay your wages, but don't come to work. No, at least then you won't block the bureaucracy. Or you all come to work, but you all would attend training courses in accounting, in whatever, to train you for a better job outside the state. So I think that because of the large amount of inefficiencies that exist right now, that's why it is possible to do a reform that is not in any way as painful as some people have claimed. Perhaps for Syed Mokhtar in particular, it will be painful, but that would not be true of most, is my guess. I've presented you these 5 principles. At the Penang Institute, we have prepared a development plan for the state, which we think is applicable for the country as a whole. And I would like to request you to get online and give me some feedback on how we could make the Penang paradigm a better